Hi, this is Jim Cunningham. We're going to talk about building a sellable law firm or other services business. Do you want top dollar when you sell your business, when you sell your law firm? You should start by building a business or firm that buyers want to purchase. Cunningham Legal, we've acquired over 30 California law practices over the past 2 decades. So you'll hear what buyers, from my standpoint as a buyer, really do when they dig into your numbers, right? When you're looking at your operations and your risk profile, you're going to leave with actionable strategies to create value and avoid red flags. And this is really important because a lot of deals stop when a buyer sees one or two red flags. They go, yeah, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire. I don't really like it. I'm Jim Cunningham. I'm a partner at Cunningham Legal. I have over 30 years experience. I am a certified specialist in estate planning, trust, and probate law, a real estate broker, securities and insurance licensed, and a pilot single engine land instrument rated, although I am not current. This is a disclaimer. This is information only. This has been prepared by our law firm. This is not legal advice. This should not be relied on as legal advice. Hopefully, it's mildly entertaining because a lot of this stuff can be pretty boring. And if you don't happen to be a lawyer and you own a small business that is a services business, most likely it's a services business, some of this information may be highly relevant to you. Some may seem like, well, that doesn't really fit. But really, I'm looking at this through the lens of a law firm. So why this matters? Do you own a job or do you own a business? A job or a business? This is the hard truth about selling a law firm. I think most law firms need a tremendous amount of work to be sellable, or to be sellable at favorable terms to the seller, we'll put it that way. These are largely, and we've looked at, I don't know how many firms, well over 100 in the last 20, 22 years. These tend to be profitable jobs, not transferable businesses. And unfortunately, that is reflected in the value of a practice. So when you're a seller and you say, well, you know, I've done my research, I've gone into AI, I've Googled, whatever, I think my business is worth this amount. The reality is a buyer is the one with the money. And this oftentimes these are just viewed as a job. So not necessarily business. We're going to talk about how you bridge that gap between a job and a business. Revenue by itself does not create value in the eyes of a buyer. Just because your revenue in your firm is $1 million doesn't mean that's a sellable business. It might be, and we have an example specifically on about $1.2 million practice, different valuations on the practice, and that's toward the end. If the business or practice cannot be run by the owner, or cannot be run without the presence of the owner, then really, is there even a practice to acquire? Over 91% of California law practices have fewer than 3 attorneys in them. So that's a lot of lawyers out there. 91% of California law practices have less than 3 lawyers, so tend to be smaller shops. An acquisition can be a purchase of client relationships or a client list, but the price usually is reflective of that. So what we're talking about is, are you getting a list of clients, a phone number, a website, maybe the emails, and whatever falls off the truck in the future, you're going to get. We'll talk about that versus buying a business where you have documented processes, and we'll get into that. So service businesses employ 80% of American workers. So 70 to 80% of small businesses are services businesses. And that's just a reality of the American economy. The SBA, by committee, defined what a service business is. It is an independently owned and operated business that is not dominant in its field and meets size standards based on the industry. Now, what is a size standard? Now, this may not sound small to you. Up to 500 employees is considered a small business. Now, I look at that, I think, wow, that's a pretty big enterprise, 500 employees. 1,000 employees, if it's tech or manufacturing, can still be considered a small business. Typically, we see revenue up to 30 million. Often, it's 0 to 50 employees and less than 10 million in revenue. So, by the way, 80% of these have no employees at all. But let me say that again. Most small businesses are 0 to 50 employees. Now, 80% of those are 0 employees, just the owner operator, and less than 10 million in revenue. So a lot of firms that we look at, they might be 400,000 in revenue, maybe 700,000, maybe a million, maybe 2 million. We don't see a whole lot that are getting close to that $10 million revenue mark. The demographic clock is ticking. And if you fit this profile, I think you're in kind of a tough spot. The majority of California small business owners are over the age of 55. Many have no documented succession plan. Internal succession is rare. It does happen, but many times the people that work for you, we're talking about if you're the business owner, you have somebody working for you. Oh, I'm going to sell the business to, if I'm a retiring attorney, I'm going to sell that to my associate attorneys. Many times the associate attorneys are often financially unable to pay you what you think the practice is worth or what it may in fact be worth. They just lack the drive, not the drive, maybe they lack the desire to be a business owner. They want to be a W-2 employee. So we see that quite frequently. Younger lawyers, again, prefer employment over ownership risk. There is risk when you have to make payroll every 2 weeks or every month or every week or however you pay your attorneys or your staff. Those people are paid before you're paid, and that makes a lot of people nervous. Private equity is increasingly interested in platform firms with infrastructure. What am I talking about? Well, I've had recently, over the last 6 months or so, several private equity firms I've been in conversations with about, hey, what's going on in the space? Private equity is reaching out and they're looking at first personal injury law firms for a variety of reasons, but private equity is also in a roll-up strategy with small businesses. So it is not uncommon for private equity to engage in a roll-up strategy. For example, you may have a bunch of UPS stores in maybe a rural market, and private equity might come in and start buying up the mom and pops and aggregate the stores. So instead of one owner operator, maybe they're operating 100, and you do get economies of scale and you do get higher multiples. And we'll talk about what a multiple is. But private equity is increasingly looking at this. And there's been not a shift from tech, but there's been an interest in things other than tech in the private equity space. So that's kind of what I'm hearing through the grapevine, if you will. Firms without a transition plan are running down their own equity clock. What do I mean by that? If you do not have a transition plan, a succession plan, an exit plan, and you're getting older and older and older. I happen to be Gen X. I'm Generation X. I am the smallest by population, the smallest generation. We have a lot of baby boomers exiting, and baby boomers right now are between 60 and 80. I happen to be 56, I think, 57 this year, I guess. So I'm in that Gen X. I'm in that middle ground. There are a lot of millennials, a much bigger generation behind the Gen X. But if you're a boomer wanting to sell your business, your practice, or your business, there aren't as many buyers as when maybe you were buying your business, right? From the silent generation, from the people who are older than the baby boomers, because the baby boomers were such a large slug. I think this is one reason private equity is coming in, is there just simply aren't enough buyers. If you're 60 and over without a plan, you are consuming enterprise value every year. You really do need a plan because, again, I think there are fewer buyers than there used to be. And I know maybe I'm saying two things. And by the way, two things can be true at once. Private equity is moving into the space, I think, largely because there aren't enough individual business owners buying up the available businesses. It might be a market force thing that's happening. Time is either compounding value or eroding it. So the longer you wait to get a plan together, I think the more risk you're taking on. And certainly, as you'll see, we go through the materials here, the more time that goes by without having a plan and executing on that plan, you are not realizing the full value from your business or your firm. I got this information from their four paths from Patrick Ungashuk, who has written a couple of books. And he had different words for these, the different ways to pass your business, but I liked his nicknames better than what he actually said. So there are four ways to pass your business from you to a potential buyer. There is a passer, where you transfer your business to a family member, maybe a child, maybe sibling, maybe less so, a child, grandchild. The innie, an inside transaction, is where you transfer the business to a key employee. And again, we talked about the reluctance maybe of key employees. They either lack the money or the will or the motivation to move from W-2 to owner. That's an inside transaction. By the way, if you sell to your kid, it's less of a passer. The passer is where you give it to your kid. The innie is where you sell it to your kid, right? The outie is an outside transaction, and that's what we've been involved in our firm, is we've been the outside buyer. So it's where the business is transferred to a third party, somebody that's not working in the business, somebody that's not a family member. And then there's the squeezer. The poor squeezer. A lot of lawyers are squeezers. What they do is they extract as much value as possible from the practice, and then they simply close it. Now, I will give one word of warning to a lawyer, especially in the trust and estate space. If you're reaching, I don't know, 75, 80, whatever it is, and you say, I'm just going to close my practice. I guarantee you, you will have people reaching out to you for the rest of your life, needing a file, wanting information. What happened to this? What about that? It's a really good idea to not just close your practice, but pass it off to an attorney. I think some practices have value, meaning positive value. Some practices have negative value, where the hassle simply isn't worth the effort for the buyer. And that's why a lot of people are squeezers, because there are no available buyers, is really where I'm going with that. But you really do need to find a landing spot. You need a place to, either return the client property, which is the client file. But this is especially true for lawyers that you just close your practice. It's going to be you or your surviving spouse that's dealing with this. So let's look at a passer. This is for no money. You transfer your business for no consideration to a family member. If it's a transfer for consideration, it's lawyer speak for money. It looks more like a transfer to an INI. And then the inside transaction is a sale to associates or partners. This would be an INI to, these are the potential pool of purchasers. This can be implemented gradually over time, where ownership and controls transferred to the INIs or INI in stages. The gradual transfer does several things. It reassures clients. Clients, if you have key clients that are repeat customers who you're continually serving, you might see that in a corporate environment. This reassures the clients. Certainly lenders, many times if the firm is borrowed money, they're lending money they're not lending it necessarily to the company, they're lending it to the person. And so they might be a little nervous about the founder or the principal exiting. And so the bank might say, gee, well, we want to call that loan, or we want some reassurance. But if they see that things are going well over time, that helps. It reassures employees. Employees say, gee, if those associates start running that firm, I don't know that I'm going to get my paycheck. But if it's done over time, it tends to reassure employees, really for an orderly and successful exit. Often, unfortunately, the associates lack cash to pay the exiting principal or collateral for a purchase. They just don't want to go out and get a loan and write a check to the exiting attorney. The Audi is the sale to a third party. Now, this is kind of what we've done in our firm, where we've been on the buy side. And typically, this is ideally for top dollar, although dollars are only one term in a transaction, right? A lot of other terms, price is just one term. Should you use a broker? Should you use an investment banker or not? I've seen, or just, meaning do it on your own. I'm not sure. If you're a business broker watching this, please don't take any offense. I have seen, with rare exception, business brokers add value, because a law firm, in my experience, a law firm is just simply not like another services business. It's got its own unique things. And you'll see that as we go through the materials, the valuations tend to be lower than in other businesses. So, spoiler alert, lawyer, if you're looking to get a whole bunch of money for your practice, there are some real caveats in there that we're gonna talk about. Should you use an investment banker? What's the difference between a business broker and an investment banker? Well, typically business brokers handle sales of businesses up to about 10 million. Again, I'm just painting a broad brush here. Investment bankers tend to come in at the $10 million level. That's when you have private equity starts to look at businesses. So an investment banker, what is that? It's a person who helps you maybe a year before the sale or 2 years before the sale. Could be longer, but typically we see that time period. Get your business sort of up and ready for sale. Clean up your books, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. But an investment banker it serves a similar function to the business broker, but I think they're far more involved. They also have a success fee like a broker does. Should you grow your practice or not? If you're getting ready to sell your practice, does it make sense to put the foot on the gas pedal and grow the practice? I think if you can continue to make money, it might make sense. But if you ramp up revenue and your profits decrease, that might be counterproductive. So I think it's an individual decision. The importance of keeping enterprise, the people, including your staff, name, processes intact. I will tell you, when we started acquiring practices, when I was a younger lawyer, I was less concerned about the staff. But if you want to scale a business, you do need people. Even though AI is out there, we still need people. So if you're a lawyer and you say, I want to take my practice from $1 million to $10 million in revenue, for example, you're not going to be able to do that working harder, because there's only so many hours in the day. You're going to need more attorneys, more paralegals, more staff. And so to scale your business, you might want to keep some of these employees at the business or not, right? And you got to go through that due diligence process before you close the deal. The seller may wish to keep the seller's legacy intact or not. Well, I want my name on the door. I want my name, I've spent 40 years in practicing law. I want to continue with my name out there in the ether. Is that ego? Is it not? Sure, certainly it's a little bit of ego. Certainly it might be brand recognition. You might flip the script and you might acquire an older attorney's practice and drop your name, right? I've seen that happen at least in one instance is in Southern California. Then there's the poor squeezer. This poor guy, he squeezes every dollar out of its practice until its closure. It is typically a profitable practice with cash flow. Maybe there's no one to transfer it to. The competitors have a low barrier to entry. So if you're in a services business, whether it's law or something else, and there is a low barrier to entry, by definition, services is a low barrier to entry. You don't have to buy capital equipment. You don't have to build a factory. You don't have to invest a lot of money. Services by their nature are low barriers to entry. Now, obviously, you have to be a lawyer. So that is a barrier. But once you're a lawyer, there's no barrier to hanging out your own shingle and saying, I'm going to go out and compete in the workspace. You may have no any to take it over, even for free, right? You can't even pass it to an associate, right? There's nobody there to take over. I would say the smaller and the more disorganized and the less tech forward, especially now, if you're tech backward, that is not helpful. I have all these files in my drawer. I have all these wills that I wrote. Surely these probates will ripen one day. I don't do any email. It's all phones with my clients. My clients don't do email. These are all negatives. I got to tell you in the due diligence process. It's better to say I have no documents in my office. Everything is scanned. I have a robust email list. I'm communicating with my clients. These are indicators that it's a more sellable practice versus a squeezer type practice. Poor guy, or not. My dad was a squeezer. He had a law practice. He did plaintiff's personal injury. He retired at age 75. And he told me, Jim, I made more money than I've ever made the last couple of years of practice. And the reason is his headcount, his employee headcount dwindled, and he was getting paid because plaintiff's personal injury, you might not get paid for 2 or 3 years. He was getting paid on these cases that he had done a lot of work on. So he's basically collecting accounts receivable. So if you're a personal injury attorney looking to hang it up, that is not necessarily a bad exit. I think you could accelerate the payment of money on the cases if you make a deal if you're a personal injury lawyer. So just a little personal insight there. So how firms change in real life. Now, if you're watching this on video, you might see IRL. That's an acronym for in real life, I guess for people who are under 40. So how do law firms, we'll put this in the context of law firms, how do law firms change hands? Well, it can be a sale or a merger. And a merger typically involves an attorney becoming of counsel or senior counsel. I mean, it could be sometimes a partner, but oftentimes if the person is, near the end of their career, but continuing to work, that would be senior counsel versus of counsel. Many law firms, by the way, the reason these older attorneys might join a firm as a partner and be senior counsel and not a partner is a lot of law firms have something called the cash balance pension plan, which is a way of putting away a lot more money every year. And if you hire an older attorney as W-2 and potentially partner, you may have to contribute to their pension plan. And oftentimes their nominal comp, the pension contribution is greater than their compensation. So there's a lot of reasons why we see a little bit of sort of pulling the curtain back and why you might see these different designations. So there's a client list or book of business. So let's say a solo is retiring or a partner wants out. It's a revenue share over time, typically with a consulting agreement. So somebody says, Jim, they raise their hand. They say, Jim, I'm done. I want to merge my practice into yours. I want to work for a couple of years and then I'm done. So that might be an of counsel relationship, potentially senior counsel relationship. There might be a revenue share over time. Or a buyer might just write the retiring attorney a check for their book of business. So you separate out the continuing labor of the attorney from the book of business. A lot of firms will have a revenue share for a period of time. Sometimes it's 10 and 50, and 20 and 40. So what I mean by that is, let's say an attorney is retiring, they might have they typically have to have a minimum size book of business. And a lot of firms and I'm doing this from the San Francisco Bay Area, this webinar today, a lot of firms in San Francisco Bay Area are looking for firms of kind of like 800 to $1 million in revenue. So these are typically robust solo practices. And you come on as of counsel. They might pay you 20% for things you bring to the firm but don't work, and they might pay you 40% for things that you bring to the firm and do work. Other firms are like 10 and 50, so they'll give you 10%. So if you retire and you merge in with the firm, they'll give you 10% of things that you bring in but don't work, and they'll give you 50% of things that you bring in and do work. And typically, this is going to be an hourly type billing situation. They don't really, larger firms don't really understand flat fees. So if you're a flat fee shop, that can be a little challenging. But that's kind of what I'm seeing in the marketplace. So you can either sell your book of business and have some continuing relationship, or it can be a percentage arrangement. So that's the client list book of business. Senior counsel, two things can be true at once. So you might bring your book of business to a firm. A senior counsel might join the firm, bring a book of business. They're not going to have equity. These might be late stage in your career lateral hires. And these are lawyers who want, frankly, status of a firm without management of stuff. So they come in as senior counsel. They say, look, we'll do some type of revenue share. And then they kind of continue on indefinitely. But what we see with the of counsel relationships is those oftentimes are shorter term, not always, but many times they're shorter term on the horizon. So of counsel typically shares office space and branding, transitioning toward retirement, and compensated on a percentage of collections, as I discussed. Types of law firms: acquisitions, equity partner buy-in. This is a capital contribution. So, there are three lawyers and they say, we'll bring in another partner. You got to deposit capital. Sometimes it's 50% of annual draw. So we see that in accounting firms. But you have capital contribution, and you do have to be bringing in significant revenue. Most firms are going to want to see somebody that has a book of business larger than they can handle themselves. So you might have a book of business. You say, hey, I can generate $2 million in revenue, but I'm only doing $700,000 of that myself on a billing basis. So that other $1.3 million will be performed by associate attorneys and other staff members of the firm. The firm wants shared risk and governance. So they want to spread the risk around, but you also got governance. You got to follow the rules, right? You got to make sure that things are orderly. There's also the full entity acquisition or merger. So this is where the legal entity purchases the book of business, maybe purchases any contracts, takes on any contracts that they might have, any ongoing contracts, copy or whatever it is. Their staff, you're going to have a merger agreement. The firm typically has significant value. It's not going to be de minimis value. Strong brand equity is always helpful, and ongoing operations worth preserving. So we're going to kind of get into some details here, but these are a little bit an equity partner buy-in versus someone who has a practice with employees. So typically the equity partner buy-in, maybe bringing no employees, maybe some. The full entity acquisition is typically an ongoing practice where somebody is seeking an exit or a merger with another firm. Most real world deals are hybrids, I will say. You can acquire a list and keep the seller as of counsel for 3 years, of counsel for a year working, and then client list only, meaning you're working for the first year to kind of wind things down, but not taking any new matters, and then paying some type of percentage going forward on the client list. Maybe senior counsel for 2 years, then client list only. So senior counsel taking on new matters, working through your existing matters, maybe taking on matters that the firm originates, that the senior counsel helps. So they're really integrated for a period of time. Could be 2 years, could be 5 years, could be, we don't know how long. And then after that, maybe some payout on the client list if you're not buying the practice when that senior counsel joins the firm. Enough counsel can be rainmaking only. That's where somebody says, look, I don't want to handle any matters. I just want to bring revenue into the firm. That's one type of arrangement. And then there's of counsel for niche practices. So if somebody says, I have a highly specialized area of practice, I do want to continue on indefinitely, but it's kind of not really related to the underlying practice of the firm, or maybe it's a hyper specialty. Oftentimes we see those of counsel relationships because that of counsel attorney can plug into a law firm and have the phone answered and the office things handled, where the lawyer's like, look, I don't want to run a business. I just want to work. That's an of counsel relationship. So we see that quite a bit. Internal succession versus external sale. Internal succession, and again, we're talking about the 4 ways to acquire a firm. Now we're going to talk about it's similar but slightly different. An internal succession, this would be the any transaction, often produces a lower valuation multiple. So you need to be aware of this, but can preserve culture and client continuity. So the internal succession we have seen typically is not the highest price that you're going to get. It's just a reality. Payment terms are frequently extended over longer periods, and financing may depend on seller support and gradual transfer. So not transfer all at once, but transfer maybe over a period of time, as we discussed. External sales may, not always, may generate a higher theoretical valuation, but significantly deeper due diligence. What am I talking about? If you work in the firm and you're familiar with the firm's operations and the staff and the revenue and the ins and outs and the culture, you kind of already done your due diligence. If you're an outside buyer, you don't know these people. You got to trust but verify, right? As Ronald Reagan said. But that's where you get your due diligence. The harder the number, as in like if you say, hey, I want to sell my practice for this dollar amount, the more certain that dollar figure is, you should expect more due diligence, right? And due diligence means we start high and kind of work the price down. So that initial price on that letter of intent, oftentimes it comes down, right? When due diligence reveals some problems in the practice. External sales may generate, again, they may generate higher theoretical valuation. Cultural integration risk increases with outside acquisition. So if your people are staying, if you're leaving and your people are staying, how is that cultural mix gonna work? So law firms are different. They're like any other company, or whatever services company you're selling. Your culture may be totally different from the culture of the acquirer. You may have a culture of like, hey, we're one big family. We go on picnics together, and then you merge in with a company that they're not friends, they're not friendly, they're just kind of cold. That's what I'm talking about, differences in culture. External sales can have complex deal structures, and the papering of the deal, meaning the document stack is thicker. It's thicker, and it increases the transaction costs. So there may be a broker involved or not, but this due diligence, this longer time period, this greater papering tends to drive up professional fees and just more headspace for both the buyer and the seller. Each pathway requires intentional preparation. I would say years in advance. Buyer psychology and due diligence. I'm going to give you the buyer's mindset. So I've been a buyer on a lot of deals, and I'm going to tell you what buyers are looking at during due diligence. This is where deals live or die. Valuation is theory until diligence begins. This is when optimism meets documentation. Professional buyers assume nothing and verify everything. Okay. Most price reductions happen at this stage, as I mentioned, the due diligence stage. Financial review. So what is a buyer going to look at? Buyers are going to want to go back 3 to 5 years on financial statements. Now, we are thankfully beginning to come out of COVID. When I'm saying 5 years ago, we're recording this in 2026. 5 years ago was 2021. It was kind of in the middle of COVID, right? And that kind of upset a lot of people's financials. Some were great, some weren't. And, everyone had their own business, went through their own, drama and machinations during COVID, but buyers are going to look back 3 to 5 years. So just pay attention to that. They reconcile tax returns to internal profit and loss reports, right? What's really going on? We're going to analyze accounts receivable aging. What am I talking about? Older receivables get a discount. If you have a problem collecting your billings, that's a problem for you as a seller. That's going to affect valuation from a buyer standpoint and move that valuation number down if you have a lot of accounts receivable, especially older accounts receivable that, if anything's over 120, it's kind of deemed uncollectible. Now that kind of can be hard with a law firm because a lot of times you're going to get paid, just not now because you're waiting on a court order, you're waiting for the probate to end, you're waiting for the property to get sold, whatever it is, but they're still going to get a discount. So you really need to maintain good billing and essentially good capital controls when it comes to billing and getting collected if you want a higher price. They study revenue trends. So a buyer's going to look at revenue trends and profit consistency over time. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. 70% of small business deals experience price adjustments after financial diligence. What does that mean? Okay, we'll pay you $1 million for your business. Then they go through the financial due diligence, like, we're going to reduce it by this amount, or there's no deal. And you as the seller, you're like, oh gosh, it's killing me. But I think you should expect that as a seller. In professional services, inconsistent earnings can reduce valuation multiples by 20 to 40%. And we will see an example of that toward the end of the materials. Operational review. How does a caller become a client step by step? What is the client journey? How does the sales funnel work? You need to know what a sales funnel is. It's like all the things that happen to come down, all the people who come in and they kind of fall out of the funnel. until they become a client. So how does a caller become a client? Step by step. Is your intake documented or dependent on memory? How do people become clients? So, or how do people become customers if you're not in a law business, right? How do they do that? Is it just, oh, it's in my head? Well, what do you do? Well, they call and then I get my little notepad and I write their name and then I do this. But is that documented? That needs to be documented. What systems track case deadlines and performance? So deadlines, what's due? When is it due? What if you don't track it at all? You don't know what you should have done until somebody calls and they say, I hired you 2 years ago and I haven't heard anything, right? So you need to make sure that there's a system in place. And performance. I cannot tell you how many lawyers I talk to. They say, well, we don't track our time. We do estate planning on a flat fee, or we do personal injury. We just don't track our time. If you don't track your time, how do you track your cost? Because in a service business, typically the single biggest cost is labor. If you're not tracking the cost of your input to get money from a client or a customer, I just don't even know how you run a business. To me, this is not a business, right? So it's something really to think about. Track performance, meaning how much does it cost you for every dollar that comes in revenue? How much is going out for each dollar that comes in? That's something that should be tracked. I got to tell you, I personally hate tracking it. I don't like tracking it. It just drives me nuts. But it's one of those things that if you really do want to run a business and you do want to get a higher multiple, you need to track it. This is really, really important. And this next point has, I will say personally, has been very hard for me. Can the team operate without the founder in the room? Everyone has an ego. I'm probably revealing way too much, and I'm going to have to stop myself. But all of us have egos, especially lawyers. And it's really hard when an associate or a partner does something better than you would do, that it's like, oh my gosh, that's so it's a story. What story do we tell ourselves? If you're the kind of person who says, no email is going to go out of our firm unless, I'm copied on the email. I'm going to be involved in every meeting. I'm going to be quality control in every step of the way. That's a lot of ego. You could call that hubris. On the other hand, you could call it professional competence. But here's one of the problems. If you are required to keep this business running, it negatively affects your valuation. It makes your business worth less. It is better for your valuation if you are not needed in the firm. If you never set foot in the office, let's say you take a trip for 2 years and you're totally not communicating with the office, that business or that firm is worth more than if you're there working your tail off 80 hours a week. It's counterintuitive, but it's something really to think about. Small firms dominate the legal landscape. Again, we mentioned that small firms dominate the legal landscape. Small firms are falling victim to a lot of these things that we're talking about. Risk assessment. Buyers are asking one question: can I be stuck with liability? That's really what they're asking, meaning am I going to make money, or are the liabilities going to exceed what I'm putting in? Meaning, if I buy this firm or this practice, what work hasn't been done, which is a big one, meaning somebody took money to do work but didn't perform the work. That's like a balance sheet liability. That work has to be performed. What about employer liability? California now, if you acquire the assets of an S corp in a stock sale, in a asset sale, you are liable up to 4 years for any labor law violations. That is a liability. You need to address that in your agreement. Whether it's a law firm or another services business, that is a liability that you're taking on. You need to get what is called indemnification or reimbursement from the seller. So we're going to either do a holdback, but that should be addressed in your asset purchase agreement. What about in the law firm setting? What about bar complaints or disciplinary history? That gets heavy attention. I got to tell you, if a seller has a spotty bar history, really negative, probably it might be a showstopper, right? So it's something to pay attention to. Trust accounting absolutely has to be clean. It's an ethical obligation. What I'm talking about here is, I'm not talking about your living trust. Lawyers have a trust account where they put client property into this account. And when you look at lawyers who get disciplined or disbarred, a lot of times they're not running their trust account properly for very small amounts of money. So that needs to be clean. Again, those cows come back to the barn, as it were, after the sale. So the former client of the selling attorney calls and says, well, I gave that attorney $5,000 and the work hasn't been done. And where's the money? Right. Well, that money should be in the trust account, should be properly accounted for. Employment practices, we talked about California labor law, and internal risks can shrink value fast. Any unresolved malpractice exposure, obviously, that's lawyer speak for the lawyer did something wrong and get sued. That's going to get priced down pretty hard. American Bar Association says 80% of all attorneys will face a malpractice lawsuit at least once in their career. The average estate planning attorney in California, it's 3. So it's something to be mindful of. Estate planning is considered high risk due to liability to non-clients. So an attorney is liable not only to the client, but the people who are supposed to inherit on the estate plan, and those would be the non-clients. What do buyers fear most? Buyers fear revenue is going to evaporate right after a public announcement of the sale. And again, if you're a selling attorney, this is something you might be thinking, well, my reputation is so good and these people come to me because I'm the best in town. If I close my doors, they're not going to go with the buyer. Well, that's not really what happens. They go with the buyer because you say, this is the person I entrust with my practice, right? So that it's important to have that trust passed on to the buyer. Key staff members, again, what do buyers fear? If you bring on key staff members, they resign within 6 months of the transition. Maybe the seller checks out emotionally and stops supporting the transition process. We see that quite a bit. Sometimes it's not necessarily their choice. Sometimes it's a health issue. Hidden trust accounting irregularities. That's why we need clean trust accounting, trust books. Referral sources provide loyal to the individual, not the institution. So this is something that we see. The referral sources who are referring to the selling attorney, they really need to be loyal to the selling attorney's institution or the firm, not just the selling attorney, because those are difficult relationships many times to pass from one to the next. It's another reason to have associate attorneys in your firm, by the way, and then have those associate attorneys work with your referral sources so that when you exit, you can walk the buyer through like, look, I've successfully transitioned my referral sources to my associate attorneys, which lawyers are very reluctant to do. Think about this. If it's a low barrier to entry and you pass your relationship to or include your associate attorney on those referral relationships, your associate attorney can leave at any time and there's no non-compete that's valid, that's enforceable in California, and that associate attorney can take those relationships with them. So you need to take care of your associate attorney, right? But again, it's a little bit of a paradox is these are highly personal relationships. I think it's better if the associate attorney is involved in that referral relationship as well. Unresolved malpractice exposure and murky post-closing liability is another issue. Operational fragility replaces expected stability. It's about documenting your processes. It's very important. Everything you do should be documented. And in the age of AI, it's not hard. I think there are plenty of software out there that can just click on and kind of record what you're doing and write your process. In fact, I saw something recently on an AI sort of advertisement on an email that does just that. Buyers revenue numbers less than structural weakness. I don't know what that point was. I think I knew it when I wrote it. For all these reasons, firms often trade at a steep discount. Let's go through some valuation logic. Understanding valuation logic. Valuation is not how hard you worked or how long you worked, right? It's not what you think it's worth. Valuation is based on economic reality. What we talk about is normalizing earnings to drive a baseline. So buyers are going to recast your financials to determine operating profit. When you spend this much money, how much money comes back to the firm, right? So your revenue minus expenses is your profit. This is what we're talking about here. Personal expenses and inflated compensation are adjusted. So if you have your spouse on there and maybe your kids and you're running a lot of personal expenses through the firm, you need to track those as a seller. It's okay to have those in there, assuming they're all legal with the IRS and Franchise Tax Board. That's in there, but you should identify what those expenditures are so that you can strip those out and get to your seller's discretionary earnings. And we'll talk about that. One-time spikes are discounted to avoid overpaying. Clean financial reporting reduces uncertainty in this process. So clean financials is very important. The cleaner your numbers, the stronger your valuation foundation. Buyers pay for repeatable income. Let me say that again. Buyers pay for repeatable income, not your best year ever. So they're going to look at the trend over time, right? Recurring revenue increases predictability. How do law firms have recurring revenue? if you're a criminal law attorney and it's based on your reputation, I hope you don't have repeat business, right? I mean, you might have repeat business, but oftentimes that's based on the person's individual reputation. Those tend to trade at a much lower multiple than a personal injury firm or an estate planning firm. So recurring revenue increases predictability. Recurring revenue is predictable for personal injury based essentially on their marketing spend, right? Because people get in a car accident and they're going to call based on, I saw that name on a bus or I saw that name at the basketball game, whatever it is. Another one is estate planning. People tend to come back to update estate plans. Certainly when people pass away or get sick, there's something called trust administration. And I think you can look at the demographics of your client base and have with reasonable certainty predicted future revenue. That's why estate planning firms and personal injury firms, PE, private equity is looking at those two classes of firms more than others, at least right now. Stable intake patterns, lower future risk assumptions. So if you can see that what you do delivers a certain result, tends to be more predictable of revenue in the future versus, stuff all over the place. This directly increases the multiple applied to earnings, and we're going to talk about that. Margins, healthy margins show pricing power and operational control. What am I talking about? A healthy margin. What I'm talking about is if your firm earns $1 million a year and your expenses are 950,000, that's a smaller margin than if your firm earns $1 million a year and your expenses are 600,000. Your margin is, 40% versus 5%. That's what I'm talking about. And that's 40% is a healthier margin. 20 to 30 is kind of what in the law firm healthy margins, kind of 20 to 30% range is what it should be. Strong margins protect against market shifts and staffing changes. They help. Protection lowers perceived downside risk. If you've got the pricing power and a good control on your costs, that is less risk to the buyer. So again, what I'm saying here is it's not like, oh, well, if a firm does $1 million a year, then it's worth this amount. No. We're going to look a little bit deeper than that. Again, we'll have a couple of examples on that. Buyer comfort expands valuation range, meaning the buyer's willing to pay more. Founder dependency increases transition risk. Again, if the founder's working their behind off 80 hours a week, that increases the risk for the buyer. It's counterintuitive, right? You might think, oh, well, I'm building the value by working more on the firm. Not really. Distributed leadership lowers the chance of revenue collapse, meaning if you're in charge of everything and you leave, you're going to have a harder time with revenue versus if you have some people in there who are leading the firm. So if you're an absentee owner with a managing lawyer and a few other departmental managers, and maybe it's a firm of 15 people, something like that, that's going to be a higher value than you and 14 people, and they all directly report to you. Staff stability reassures buyers about continuity. Kind of hard to gauge staff stability. I guess you could say through the due diligence phase, because the staff will find out because the buyer's going to interview the staff. If all the people say, yeah, if so-and-so retires, I'm out of here, it's less stable than people say, oh, you guys seem like a good buyer, and I certainly would want to, stay on. Continuity protects post-sale earnings. Again, from a buyer standpoint, that's really what I'm going to take a look at. Protected earnings justify stronger offers. So the more reliable the future earnings are, the higher the price the seller is going to get. Operational scalability expands upside. Law firms are very hard to scale, I will say, as a service business. Very hard to scale. Documented systems reduce chaos during growth. If everyone's doing their own thing, you're not really scaling. You're just kind of increasing the chaos. People should be on the same page with their systems. Systems must be documented. Technology integration increases efficiency without fragility. What am I talking about here? If everyone's using their own technologies and they're kind of doing their own thing, you might have 10 lawyers with 10 separate calendaring systems and 10 separate databases for their clients. Not so good. It's better to be integrated on one platform. Clear processes allow expansion without founder bottlenecks. So if you have clear processes established, not everything has to go through the founder. You can add more people. You can add more attorneys. You can add more paralegals. You can add more staff people. You can add more salespeople if you're a non-lawyer business. Scalable platforms create upside potential for buyers. So if a buyer goes, I see you have your processes in place. It's not dependent on the founder, and you guys are doing $10 million a year this year. if I buy this for whatever dollar amount I'm going to buy, and then I invest $1 million, I can increase the revenue to 15 million. And that's what I'm talking about. Scaling is increasing revenue without changing your systems, right? So you just want to get bigger without necessarily having to add more chaos to the structure. Upside potential increases strategic value beyond simple earnings. So strategic value, very interesting. You can have different kinds of buyers. You can have a financial buyer who looks at your company and you say, look, I don't know anything about your company. I'm going to keep your leadership in place. I just want a return on my investment. That's a financial buyer. A strategic buyer is somebody who says, we are not in this geographic location. It's kind of a typical strategic buyer. You might have a Southern California law firm buying a Northern California law firm because they don't have people in Northern California. They may have some clients in Northern California that are hard to serve, but that strategic buyer may be willing to pay a premium versus the buyer who's next door, like an accretive buyer. They go, well, I'm not a financial buyer. I'm not a strategic buyer, but you're in my own city or own region. I'm going to buy your practice so I can get your people and your book of business. And that's a little more accretive, meaning just it's adding to it. So if they pay for every dollar they pay for your practice, it's more than $1 in value for them. By definition, if you're buying something, you're not going to buy something and get less in return. Compliance discipline helps hidden liability exposure. Law is a heavily regulated space. You need to comply with all of the regulations. So there's labor law that every business is going to have. The law, being licensed as a lawyer, also has additional compliance. Fewer surprises increase deal certainty. Fewer surprises. So if you don't know as a buyer, that's going to make the deal less certain, and the price is going to drop. So if I really don't know if I'm taking a risk, I'm not going to pay the same price, right? So that's very, very important. Okay, seller's discretionary earnings and EBITDA. If you've never heard of EBITDA, I'm going to explain what this is. You need to reframe your ego to become replaceable. And I mentioned this being an attorney with an ego. Now, this is really hard for attorneys to grasp. I'm an attorney. I get it. Everyone has an ego. Even non-attorneys have an ego. But we're going to talk about two different things: seller's discretionary earnings and EBITDA, which is earnings before depreciation, income taxes, and amortization, depreciation and amortization. All right, seller's discretionary value, seller's discretionary earnings value. We see a range of 1.5x to 3.3x. What does this mean? The low end is 1 to 1.75 of seller's discretionary earnings. What is seller's discretionary earnings? It's what are you putting in your pocket at the end of the day? If your firm does $1 million in revenue and it's $600,000 in expenses, and as the owner, you're putting $400,000 in your pocket, that's seller's discretionary earnings. That's a little bit, EBITDA is kind of profits, a little bit different than EBITDA. EBITDA takes out the replacement salary of the exiting attorney. So seller's discretionary earnings, 1 to 1.75. This is the low end. Owner dependent revenue, meaning the owner's working in the business every day, 60, 80 hours a week, 40 hours a week, whatever it is. No associate attorneys, no documented systems, weak intake process, revenue fluctuates year to year, high AR, high accounts receivable. Well, I just working on this. I got stuck in this case and, I haven't been paid in a year. I mean, as a buyer, it's like, what's going on here? Few recurring relationships, referral sources tied to founder. Talked about that. Seller selling a client list with significant buyer transaction risk. That's really what the seller's selling, is a client list. This is not a sale of a business, but a structured wind down with some payments. Now, what we're seeing here is 1 to 1.75x. This would be the low end. 2 to 2.5x is the middle range on seller's discretionary earnings. This is with clean financials, stable margins, predictable intake, some documented systems, some staff continuity, seller stays for transition. Still founder influenced, so it's not pure chaos. And disciplined solos, I think, can land here in sort of the 2 to 2.5x of seller's discretionary earnings. So if you're putting in your pocket $400,000 a year as a lawyer, and that gets you in the 8 to 900, whatever the math is on the $800,000 to $900,000 range potentially on the value of your practice. Now, you still need to find a buyer, but where I'm going with this is I'm comparing why certain practices trade at a higher versus a lower end. I think 2 to 2.5 to 3x is a high end for seller's discretionary earnings. It's rare for solos, but can happen. This is where you have strong recurring revenue. Institutional brand that is not personally driven. What do I mean by institutional brand? Maybe it's a firm that doesn't have your name on it, or could have your name on it, but people recognize the firm, not just you. Documented procedures, like everything documented. Low revenue concentration. What does that mean? Not tied to one particular client. So like no client is more than 1 or 2% of revenue, for example. High referral retention. So you're keeping maybe a lot of clients coming back in, predictable cash flow, seller committed to structured multi-year transition. Now, this could be a transition that begins pre-sale, oftentimes continues post-sale. Strong compliance discipline. What am I talking about? I'm talking about if you're a lawyer, following all the rules. Your trust accounting needs to be accurate. Your engagement letters are consistent and updated, meaning if you change your fee that you're charging someone, you need to send an addendum to the fee agreement, right? Conflict checks are systematic. They're not haphazard. Well, they exist at all, right? Documented case procedures. When a case comes in, what's the path that the case takes? Employment law compliance, very important. Employee handbook is an important thing, but you're staying on top of the employment law compliance. Malpractice risk management. So what are you doing to de-risk for malpractice? And clean financial integrity. So good financials and clean. So when buyer feels confident, revenue can survive the handoff. The confidence increases the multiples. EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Is revenue. It's operating expenses minus, it's revenue minus operating expenses minus fair market compensation for a replacement attorney. This is different than seller's discretionary earnings. This is adjusted EBITDA. If the owner must be replaced, that cost must be deducted. If the owner has not set foot into the office for 2 years and just gets checks, there's no replacement compensation, right? So again, this kind of goes to the idea that the more the owner is not needed in the firm, the higher the valuation. Counterintuitive, but the higher the valuation. For most small firms, this is under 5 million in revenue. What we're seeing in the marketplace is a 3x to 6x adjusted EBITDA, but context matters enormously. A low is 3 to 4x EBITDA, mid is 4 to 5, and high is 5 to 6. And this is in the private equity space. Typically, you're getting outside funding for this. So let's look at a 3 to 4 range of EBITDA. This is investable, but not scalable. What do I mean by that? Revenue can still be founder heavy. Leadership bench is thin. Maybe you don't have any associate attorneys, or maybe you have one and it's a kind of a wobbler. Margins are decent, but not exceptional. Okay. Margins are decent, not exceptional. I would say exceptional would be above 20%, maybe around 10% margin, something like that. Some operational documentation exists, yet transition risk remains meaningful. So it is risky for the buyer. The buyer sees a functioning firm, but a fragile firm. So something can tip this to make it not functioning or not profitable. And that's where that 3 to 4x EBITDA comes in. Where do we see 4x to 5x EBITDA? By the way, confidence increases multiples. The more certain a buyer can be of the transaction that they're entering into, the more that they're willing to pay for the firm. Strong management depth. Maybe you're a founding attorney, or you're the owning attorney and you have a managing attorney. You're not managing it. Institutionalized intake systems. Institutionalized. Everyone knows what the client journey is. And that's a great way. If you're doing due diligence, you ask a phone person, hey, how does a person become a client? That person should be able to explain it. If it says, oh, I just passed the call to the owner, that's a negative, right? You want to say, oh, well, I might pass it to the owner, but after that, this happens and this happens. And then I schedule them for an appointment. If they don't schedule, then it's a follow-up call or a follow-up email. And then after 3 weeks of doing that, if there's no response or they opt out, then we close the matter and we move on to the next person. That would be an example of an institutionalized intake system. Should be written, by the way. Stable associate production, meaning you're bringing on new associates. You're training them. They either stay or they go, right? It's okay to have somebody work in your firm for 3.5 years as an associate and then leave and become a competitor. That's okay. And if that's not okay, maybe you shouldn't hire associates. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but these are all human beings walking around. These are lawyers. And if you say, gee, I'm just tired of training future competitors, which is, I know an attorney who told me that years ago, that's just the reality. Law is a fractured market. If another person hangs out their shingle, is that really going to negatively affect your revenue? I don't know. I mean, it might in your market, but there's a little bit of get over it on that one. Clean compliance record. You need to make sure that your bar records are clean, that your ethics are being followed, that your fee agreements are tight. We mentioned that earlier. Diversified referral base. If all of your business comes from one or two referral sources, not as good. Predictable margin performance going into the future. And I will tell you, as a business owner, one thing, there's this ratchet of people always want to raise. People want to make more money, make more money. And clients are like, well, why are you raising your fees? Or why are your fees so high? It's like, well, people want more money. And if I don't raise my fees, then there's not enough money to pay the people. So something's got to give. And that's where we get into margin. You want to maintain your margin, right? Buyers see durability, and durability increases confidence if all these are met. Now, the upper range, the 4 to 5x EBITDA, private equity begins to pay attention for these types of companies. This typically requires and again, this might be 10 million and above, could be 5 million, like probably 5 million and above. This they're starting to pay attention to. But most private equity says, look, if your company's not doing 10 million in revenue, it's just not worth our time to look. Multiple producing attorneys, not just you, associates, maybe partners. Low owner dependency. Again, I'll just repeat that, low owner dependency. This is going to be a bruise to your ego, or not, but I know it was to mine. But low owner dependency. All right. Repeatable systems. You can just kind of crank this thing out. You're not having to constantly tinker with your systems because they're broken. Strong EBITDA margins, typically 25% or higher. This is where you get into the higher EBITDA. Now, this is a little bit counterintuitive, that they're going to pay you more as a multiple of that 25% EBITDA than if it's 15, right? So they're going to pay you, you might get a 3x if it's 15, but you're going to get a 5x if it's 25. That's a massive difference, right? In what you're getting for, it's like 3x difference, what you're getting on your sale. So pay attention to that margin, pay attention to what personal expenses you're running through the firm. And it's really good if you have that 25% or higher. Recurring revenue elements, really great to have. Again, that recurring revenue, brand equity beyond personality. We mentioned that. Sophisticated financial reporting. We're going to talk a little bit more about what that means in a couple of slides, but you really want to have complete and sophisticated financial reporting. This is closer to a platform firm than a solo practice. This is where private equity can say, you know what, we can buy this, your systems are documented. Maybe we'll do some tuck-in deals with some other smaller firms, but this is a real good platform for us to build not a $10 million firm, but a $100 million firm, okay, or a $50 million firm, or whatever it is. They have turns, private equity is going to flip this at some point in the future. It's 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, I don't know, whatever their plan is, but they're going to want to get that 10 quickly up to a much higher number. Maybe through acquisitions, a roll-up strategy of other firms. So this is what we're seeing in the private equity range. Now, how EBITDA multiples compress value for solos. If most of the firm revenue depends on the owner's production, the replacement cost is very large. This shrinks EBITDA, right? Because you have to add back in the replacement cost of the lawyer. This shrinks enterprise value. This is why reducing owner dependency increases valuation under both seller's discretionary earnings and EBITDA models. But under EBITDA, the penalty, I think, is harsher. Seller's discretionary earnings versus EBITDA. Seller's discretionary earnings answers the question, what can I personally earn if I buy this job? If a seller's firm cannot survive the seller, EBITDA crushes the valuation, right? What can I personally earn if I buy this job? If it's really dependent on that, it may be like almost nothing, right? EBITDA answers, what does this business generate if I hire professionals to run it? Okay. So it's like buying a job versus really buying a business. And so the people with the money who are buying businesses look at EBITDA. That's what they look at. If the seller's firm can operate without the seller, EBITDA math rewards the seller. The ego loves being needed. The market rewards being replaceable. You can quote me on that. Bigger picture, enterprise value. Buyers who use EBITDA multiples think like investors. Investors care about risk-adjusted return and capital efficiency. If I invest in this company, what's my return going to be? And I'm going to adjust that. The more risky it is, the return drops effectively, right? The less risky, because you're going to want a certain type of return. So if it's riskier, you're going to pay less. Capital efficiency. How efficient is my capital being deployed? What's my return on capital and my return of capital? Scalability and margin protection. These are intertwined. Can I grow this firm as it's presently configured and add on more attorneys and more paralegals and protect the margin? Or is my margins going to get eroded? Downside containment. What can go wrong? How can we mitigate what can go wrong? If you want higher EBITDA multiples, you must build a firm that looks like infrastructure, not just not your personality. This takes intentional design and can take 3 to 5 years of disciplined preparation. The result is enterprise value. Let's look at deal structure reality, the earnout. So how are deals structured typically with lawyers? Sellers often focus on valuation multiples. Let's see. So it's a multiple of earnings and the highest dollar that's possible, while buyers focus on the structure and minimizing risk. So a seller's going to say, well, I do this amount of money per year, and I've read that it should be 3x my top line revenue. That does not apply in a law firm context. It's just not going to happen. Nice try, not going to happen. Purchase price is rarely the amount wired at closing. Upfront cash is only a fraction of total consideration. So what is an earnout? An earnout means if this happens, then you get paid. If the money comes in the door, then you're going to get a percentage of that revenue. Or I will pay you this fixed dollar amount, and I'll give you a down payment. And these other things have to happen for you to get your future payments is really what I'm talking about. That's what an earnout is. Earnouts tied to revenue are very common in professional practices. Now, as the seller, you may go, well, how do I know that this person's going to do what they say they're going to do? How do I know they're not going to lie? They're going to say, well, that money didn't come from that client. That's why you need, from the seller standpoint, you need to make sure your buyer has good capital controls, has good processes, has all the stuff we've been talking about for sellers. You need to make sure your buyer has that. Now, that's something our firm does have. We've done this many, many times. We've done many earnouts, and we have a good track record. And the people have said good things that where we've done deals. So revenue share of 2 to 5 years. I think 5's too long. I think 4 is too long. 2 to 3 is best. Sometimes 2 is better. Practices kind of can peter out after 2 years. The revenue share 2 to 5 years aligns incentives and reduces buyer risk. Now, again, the seller says, well, I'm taking risk. Well, then don't sell. I mean, this is how these earnout deals are structured. Holdbacks are common for undisclosed liability and malpractice risk. So meaning I will agree to pay you this amount of money. I will give you this amount of a down payment. I will pay you this percentage over time or this installments over time. I will hold back from the final payment this malpractice stuff that might come up. Maybe somebody paid you money and you didn't do the work, and then we have to essentially refund the client their money. That's what I'm talking about on a holdback. So deal structure on the earnout based on seller's discretionary earnings. We have 2 firms. It's the same firm. One deal is based on seller's discretionary earnings, and one deal is based on EBITDA. So this is the same firm that's being sold in these 2 examples. Sam is a solo practitioner. He has $1 million in revenue. He has 1 administrative assistant, 2 paralegals, and Sam. That is 4 people. His revenue is $1 million a year. That is $250,000 per employee. Revenue per employee is one metric we look at when buying a practice. If your revenue per employee is not $250,000, I think you have a problem. Now, if you're in a rural area, now I'm speaking in coastal and urban California, okay? If your revenue per employee is $135,000, there may not be enough revenue to adequately pay the people to get the work done, right? This is professional services. And that number used to be 135, 150, 165 before COVID. Now it's 250. People are making more money. We've had a tremendous rise in inflation. We're recording this in 2026, if you're a lawyer, you need to add up your full-time equivalents and your revenue, divide those numbers. It should be 250,000 or more per employee. Now, if it's 235, okay, that's fine. But if it's 160 or 120, that's a real problem. I just don't see that when talking to attorneys. Most people are over the $200,000 number revenue per employee. It's also a good little parlor trick. You can ask someone, how many employees do you have? And you say, well, is your revenue such and such? They go, well, how'd you know? It's like, it's not rocket science. So Sam, a solo practitioner, $1 million in revenue. Sam's, like most lawyers, disorganized and lacks proper systems. So it's not like Sam's a bad guy or he's an outlier. Sam sells to Billy the buyer. Sam sails off into the sunset. He's down in Cabo on his boat. He's out of there. Buyer agrees to pay an amount not to exceed $500,000 or 1 times seller's discretionary earnings. What Sam is earning from this is he's making about $500,000 a year. He's doing well, right? He's making a lot of money. He's working hard. Everything's going through him. The buyer says, you know what? You're disorganized, lack proper systems. You do have some employees. We'll pay you 500,000. We're going to pay you 20% of revenue collected over a period of 3 years. The first year out of the gate, the revenue is more than Sam was doing. Now, why is this? It's because Sam was overworked. Sam was working really long hours. Now, if you say, gee, 500,000 sounds great. Sam's probably working 60, 70 hours a week on this, right? He's burned out. So the reason revenue goes up is there are more people. The acquiring firm has more people. They can handle more work. They do marketing. They engage in a marketing campaign to Sam's clients saying, hey, Sam's retired and, we're the new person in town. If you haven't had your estate plan reviewed in the last 3 years, you should have it reviewed. So it generates more revenue. Billy, the buyer, pays Sam $250,000 that first year. Year 2 drops to $800,000. Now, why does it drop to $800,000? Because after that initial marketing surge, you're kind of consuming a little bit of future revenue in this case. So if Sam doesn't do any marketing, those people are going to come in. It's just they come in sooner in that first year. So Sam's revenue drops to 800,000. Billy pays 160. It's 20% of 800,000. Year 3 is 700,000 in revenue. Billy pays 90,000, not 140. Now 20% of 700,000 is 140,000, but Billy pays 90. The total, because there was a cap, right? I'll pay you 500 if this happens. Up to 500 if this happens. Total considerations paid is 500,000, not 20% of total revenue for 36 months, which would have been 550,000. That is seller's discretionary earnings. Let's look at EBITDA. Again, same practice. Sam sells to Billy, the buyer, and Sam sails off to the sunset. Buyer agrees to pay an amount not to exceed $600,000 or 3 times EBITDA of 200,000. Now, I told you Sam was making 500,000 from the practice. The replacement cost of Sam's labor is $300,000. Remember, with EBITDA, we have to add back in the replacement cost of the labor. Now, you may say, 300,000, it sounds like a lot of money. Well, this attorney's also working 60 hours a week, 50, 60 hours a week, whatever it is. He deserves it, right? He's working hard. But the true profit is 200,000. That's where I'm going with this, because remember, EBITDA, you add back in the seller's comp, right? So buyer agrees to pay an amount not to exceed 3x EBITDA of 600,000 at a rate of 20% of revenue collected over 3 years. So again, years 1, 2, and 3, we have the 1.25 million in revenue, 800 and 700. But in this one, the total paid is 550. It's more than the seller's discretionary earnings. It's 550, not 600, because Sam's practice didn't hit the full number to get there. So when we value practices, and if you're looking at this on the screen, we explain it on the screen. When we value practices, we look at SDE and we look at EBITDA. We look at them both. So what is the true value of this practice? It's probably 550,000, 525, something like that. But the reason I showed this to you is whether you go the EBITDA route or the seller's discretionary earning route, they typically they land in the same spot. It's just a different way of calculating it. It's sort of like saying 6 or half a dozen. California does have ethics on this. California Rules of Professional Conduct and California Business and Professions Code. And if you're a buyer or a seller, you do need to look at California Rules of Professional Conduct 1.17. The clients must receive, if there's a sale, written notice of the proposed sale and have the opportunity to retain other counsel or take possession of their file. Fees cannot be increased solely because of the sale. The entire practice or entire practice area must be transferred. So that would be like, we are stopping this particular area of practice or geographic area. Confidentiality must be protected during the due diligence review, and conflicts checks must be completed before integration. So you got to run those conflict checks. Selling part of your practice. So I'm going to just go back to this a little bit. You can say, we're doing estate planning and divorce, and I'm going to sell the estate planning and focus on divorce. Probably would be the other way in the real world, but you can do that. You can also say, we have an office in LA and an office in San Francisco, and we're selling our LA office. So you can sell that practice area, that geographic area. What you can't do is say, I want to work half as much, so I'm going to take the A through M clients and sell the N through Z clients. You can't do that, right? That's prohibited under the ethics rules. Trust account compliance must be verified and documented. So that's a due diligence requirement, right, on the parties. Failure to comply with ethical requirements can destroy deal value instantly and destroy deals. Building enterprise value. How do we build enterprise value? Act like a buyer of your own firm. If you're selling, you need to put on your buyer's hat. It's like, Boss Hogg from Dukes of Hazzard. Take off your seller's hat and put on your buyer's hat. Would you invest capital in your current financial reporting systems, right? Would you? Would you trust your compliance file without additional verification? Are you following all the ethics rules? Are you making sure your trust accounts in order? Are your fee agreements squared away? Do you send out a closing letter? These are all things that's when I'm talking about like compliance. Do you feel confident in the leadership depth beyond you, the founder? Do you rely on documented procedures to protect the client experience, right? Or is this all kind of in your head, or you just kind of wing it on every matter? Would revenue continued if you disappeared for 60 days? Now, for some people, sadly, no, right? It would stop. Buyers evaluate future cash flow, not past effort. You need to give yourself an honest self-evaluation. It's the starting point of the enterprise value creation. Let's look at a 5-year preparation timeline. Year 1, we're going to focus on clean financial records and internal reporting. Year 2, we're going to get your margins stabilized, right? Paying attention to what's profitable in your practice, what is not profitable. And you really should think about, if you want to maximize enterprise value, getting rid of your low profit practice areas. Every practice area, every line of business has a low profit area. You need to rethink, either somehow make it profitable or maybe stop doing it. And improve efficiency. Year 3 is develop leadership depth, not death. Develop leadership depth and delegate meaningful authority. So it's okay to let other people be in charge. You just need to get over it. If you want to, create enterprise value. Reduce owner dependency and institutionalize client relationships in year 4. Okay, so it's not you that they're hiring, it's the firm that they're hiring. And year 5 is go to market with documented infrastructure and negotiating leverage. A year before you want to sell, don't pick up the phone and say, I need to be out of this practice next week. Now, the one exception to that is if somebody has a health crisis, passes away, and maybe it's your spouse or partner who's dealing with this, or if you become a judge, that's another thing. Or maybe you have a political appointment, or you're elected to public office where you cannot keep your practice. That's a little bit different. A lot of those people end up just merging their practice into a firm. That happened to one of us. One of the people who exited became a judge, and he called me. He said, on a Wednesday, he said, Jim, I'm being sworn in on Friday. I need to transfer my practice to you on Thursday. Okay, so we did that. Preparation compounds over time and increases valuation. So doing this over time. Step 1, we're going to take a little bit of deep dive into this. Clean up and professionalize your financials. You need to hire or retain, meaning internal hire or contract with the company, competent accounting professionals if you don't already have it in place. Your spouse will thank you. So if you're a solo and your spouse is, helping you get billing out or, balance the checkbook, you're going to get a big thank you. Move to monthly financial reporting. A lot of people, they just kind of wing it, right? They just look at their bank balance. So monthly financial reporting. Ideally, you would have a cash basis accounting and an accrual basis accounting. Cash basis is how much money have we made this month. Accrual is how much have we billed this month that we're going to collect. How much have we billed this month that we will collect next month. You need to know this month what your revenue is going to be for next month. That's very, very important because you can make incremental changes to change the outcome of next month. Separate personal expenses from firm expenses, track them, reconcile trust accounts. Very, very important. Review margins quarterly and correct drift. What am I talking about? If you go, we charge a flat fee for this particular activity and we measure our time, and based upon our assumed billable hour, we are consistently going over the flat fee. You either need to get more efficient or you need to raise the flat fee, right? That's what you need to do. Part of step 1 is, do you hire a CFO, controller, staff accountant, or bookkeeper? I think this is probably one of the most important slides on here because this is really not understood unless you're an accountant watching this. You're like, well, duh, this is obvious, but lawyers don't know this stuff. The CFO is the strategist. The CFO drives financial strategy and guides major business decisions. A CFO, you got to be a big company to have a CFO, right? We're not talking small. A lot of small businesses don't have a CFO. Some do. A controller is the adult in the room or the truth teller. The controller ensures financial accuracy and delivers reliable reporting. I think having a CFO is not necessary. It is helpful. You could certainly have a fractional CFO. There are a lot of firms out there that do fractional CFO, but really what most people need is they do need a controller. They do need to know that, look, this is actually what it says it is, right? And the controller compiles reports, make sure that your financials are accurate and reliable that you can go, you know what, that is correct. I can make decisions based on this report. A staff accountant is the operator. The staff accountant handles the day-to-day accounting and keeps the books correct. So if the controller is compiling reports, the controller's compiling reports based on the staff accountant doing their job and making sure the books are accurate and correct. The bookkeeper is the recorder. The bookkeeper records the transactions, enters into the ledger, and tracks the money in and out. A bookkeeper enters data. A staff accountant ensures the numbers are actually right. In a lot of firms, the controller, staff accountant, and bookkeeper is the same person, right? They might be performing different functions. But in larger organizations, if you have an accounting team, like for example, we have a controller and staff accountant, and our staff accountants perform bookkeeping functions. We don't have a separate bookkeeper, but I suppose the larger you are, you might want to carve that out. And these are all like highest to lowest in terms of compensated. And that's the ranking there. Part of step one is tightening compliance and reduce risk. Conduct a compliance audit. Are you doing what you should be doing? Do you have data breach insurance? Is your malpractice insurance, do you have malpractice insurance and is it up to date, right? Update employment agreements and policies. Those are in California typically updated yearly, sometimes every 6 months, but typically we have a big revision coming out every year. And really do pay attention to that because you don't want a labor law violation that's going to really hurt your business if that does come out, or if you're not in compliance, it might scare a buyer off. Document your processes for ethical and operational oversight. Again, documenting your processes. Eliminate surprises. Surprises destroy leverage. Surprises destroy your ability to leverage the dollars you're investing in your business. So if you invest $1, you're going to get more return with processes than if you don't have such processes in place. Strengthen and protect margins. So step 2, this would be year 2. Raise fees if you're underpriced. And we should do that all the time, but you really need to pay attention to that. Some people, I would say a lot of lawyers are undercharged, some overcharged, but I think broadly speaking, most lawyers, when I look at it, I say, are you really charging enough? Is this really what the marketplace? It's not that we're out there, we're not taking advantage of our clients, but you need to have a profitable enterprise. Otherwise, you're not going to be around, right, to serve your clients in the future. Eliminate low margin service lines that drain resources. God, I really can't stress this enough. If you're not tracking your inputs, if you're not tracking your cost, you won't know what a low margin service offering is. And sometimes it could be your core offering, right? So it's something really, it could be a hard emotional decision to throttle back some of those services. Improve efficiency before hiring more staff. We are right in the thick of AI adoption. I think it's a great time to use these technology tools to improve your efficiency before hiring more staff. Make your staff more efficient. Get that revenue per employee higher, right? More profit. You can pay your people more. You're going to be more likely to keep them. So it's a twofer. Measure profit per matter, not just gross revenue. So look at each matter as it comes in. Was this matter profitable? Was it not profitable? Then you can see a pattern and you might say, these types of clients tend to be less profitable. And in the estate planning space, if you're an engineer and you're watching this, estate planning attorneys, what they say out of earshot of their clients are, oh my gosh, these engineers, they drive me nuts. They're looking at this 100-page document. They're looking at every word. And that tends to drive lawyers nuts. So those can be less profitable matters for lawyers. Build predictable earnings. Predictable earnings, very, very important. Step 3, develop a leadership depth. Identify maybe 2 or 3 people who can carry real responsibility. Delegate meaningful decision-making authority. Let them decide. And again, this is part of ego, is maybe train them to decide, right? You don't necessarily let them. This is like topic for a whole other webinar, is how to train and develop leaders. But really, that's something that you should be looking at. And there are a lot of resources out there to help and train leaders. Document roles so leadership is not personality driven. So documenting your roles gives clarity to everyone in the organization who's doing what. And you really don't want this leadership based on some personality of the individual, because again, that's not scalable. Documented processes are scalable. Cross-train key positions to avoid single point failure. Very important. It's important for people to take vacations. It's important for maybe a key person to take a 2-week vacation, right? Because someone else is going to do that role and they might find out, wow, boy, there's a lot of problems here. Or you need to train that maybe the next person, or train more people. And this is part of being able to scale a practice. Gradually remove yourself from daily operational bottlenecks. This is year 3. Year 4, 2 years before sale, diversify and stabilize your revenue. Reduce reliance on any one referral source. Some businesses are reliant on like a single source or two or three. That's a real problem. Build at least two consistent marketing channels. We are not talking referral sources. These might be professional referral networks, client referral programs. In some attorneys have an annual review program or trust administration work. Look at your digital presence. Should you do paid ads or not? AI is now people when they're finding attorneys and other service providers going straight into AI. What are you doing to address that change in technology? Community positioning, speaking engagements, seminars, that sort of a thing. Create recurring service offerings where appropriate. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can. Shift client relationships from individual to firm identity. So if these are your clients, now they're firm clients. So kind of start making that transition and track revenue concentration and correct imbalances early. You don't want too much revenue concentrated in too few matters. A year before sale, this is step 5, build brand equity, invest in consistent marketing messaging, define clearly who you serve and what problems you solve, narrow your positioning often, and this increases your authority. So you don't want to be all things to all people. We live in this world that is increasingly specialized, and a lot of services now are provided not necessarily in person, but through digital channels. So you're not constrained in many instances as you have been in the past with geography. Again, strengthen your digital presence and thought leadership. This is one thing we do at our firm. We do this YouTube page and webinars we like to think we are thought leaders. Publish educational content consistently. It's a great way to build your brand and to get the word out. Own your digital footprint. This is really, really important. You need to own this. Man, I could speak so much on this. You want people looking for you when they Google you. I'm not necessarily looking for attorney near me. Build credibility at speaking engagements, organizations. Create client association with the firm, not just you. So again, transferring this from the firm to you. Standardize client experience across the team. The client experience, the client journey should be consistent among different lawyers, different professionals, not everyone doing their own thing. And protect your reputation as if it were a financial asset. Your reputation is very important. We have this online community. Every idiot has a bullhorn and they can write a bad review. You really need to pay attention to that. Some buyers and 2 case studies. We'll wrap up with this. Private equity and platform firms. Private equity capital is entering the professional service markets. Laws included. I mentioned this. Personal injury and estate planning are first when it comes to private equity. And PE firms typically are looking for 10 million plus in revenue. Investors are not buying solo practitioners without systems. Very important. Our firm in the past has acquired solo practitioners without systems, and we know how to do that, right? We have a process in place to do that. But the PE firms, it's too heavy of a lift for them, I think. Too small, too hard. Platform firms look for new practices to acquire. Platform firm meaning a law firm looking for a practice, right? So not necessarily private equity, but this would be a law firm that is looking to increase its size through acquisition. They are looking. So if you're a seller, there are buyers out there, and there are more and more buyers, right, out there looking, and more sellers. To scale a practice, to get it bigger, requires documented processes and leadership bench strength. We've mentioned that. Compliance, discipline, and margin stability attract institutional capital. The market is evolving, whether small firms prepare or not. The market is changing, and I've seen this really accelerate in the last 2 years, or last 24 months. Building a platform firm increases optionality and exit leverage. So if you have a firm and you say, I'm going to grow from $1 million to 10 million and exit to private equity, this is great content for you, right? This gives you more options at the end. If you can create the systems, accrete practices, bring them in and build, you may have an exit to private equity or not, right? Or just keep going. So that's why you're watching this. Here's a real world case. Firm A, and we'll end with these 2 examples. Firm A generates 1.2 million in annual revenue, EBITDA of 200,000. Founder conducts every consultation and personally reviews every document. Accounts receivable aging exceeded 120 days on average. So a lot of money's owed. Staff turnover creates instability and training costs mount. And this may be one reason not to have written processes, because if everything's going through the owner anyway, right? This person's working 60, 80 hours a week. Documented systems are minimal, dependent on founder memory. It's all, it's in my head. I know how to do this. I'm not going to train a future competitor. The practice trades for a multiple of 1.5x EBITDA or $300,000. Okay, very low EBITDA. And we're going off an EBITDA comparison here. This is the lawyer working a lot. I work so hard in this firm. I've been doing this for 40 years. Certainly this is worth more than $300,000. Firm B generates less revenue, 900,000. Same EBITDA, $200,000 in EBITDA. 2 associates attorney, handle client consultations and legal work. Revenue pipeline is consistent, is diversified. Documented intake and drafting systems allow repeatable performance. The practice trades for a multiple of 3.2x EBITDA or $640,000. Lower revenue with stronger infrastructure commands a higher valuation, and Firm B trades for $340,000 more than Firm A, more than twice Firm A with less revenue. So I hope this has been helpful if you're a lawyer. If you're not a lawyer, I hope it's also been helpful. We have and if you're a lawyer and you're like, hey, I want to talk to you, Jim, give us a call. We have offices in Northern and Southern California. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're still watching, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will now open it up for questions. And if you're watching this, you're still watching it, keep watching. Another video is going to magically roll after this one.